Howdy, folks. Today we're diving into how you turn freezing fingers into a global business. The story behind Vallerret Photography Gloves, right after this. Welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. And hey, if you haven't already, make sure you sign up to the Camera Shake mailing list over at www.camerashakepodcast.com. We've got some awesome stuff coming up soon, so make sure you get your name down on that list ASAP. Now, without further ado, though, let's give it up for today's special guest, designer, photographer, and co-founder of Vallerret Photography Gloves, Carl van den Blom. How's it going?
Thank you. Yeah, it's good. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Cool.
It was a nice, concise intro there. I liked it.
Yeah, perfect. I think this podcast is known for its intros. Carl, for those of you who don't know you yet, give us a sort of a helicopter view over how you got started as a creative.
Wow. As a creative, I feel like you're kind of a creative or you're not. I don't know. I've always been into, I just always had a sort of a creative mind and drawn to drawing. I used to paint a lot. I used to actually do a lot of stencil art with spray paint and cutting out stencils. I went to architecture school. I studied landscape architecture. And then it's all kind of the same creative. You're making stuff up and you're drawing and you're making pictures. And it actually took me a while to pick up a camera. I was doing a lot of like snowboard films and photography, very, very amateur stuff, with whatever we had, little point and shoot cameras. And then the GoPro came out and that made filming easier. It was just to turn it on and follow your buddy. So I didn't really pick up any sort of photography skills as such. And the main reason I never really got in, well, it took me a while to pick up like a DSLR was I figured I would stop painting if I did that. I just knew myself to a point where I would be like, this is a new thing, a new creative thing. And it would take over. And it's 100% what happened. I don't know that when I last painted something, once I've picked up a camera, it was then the new creative outlet.
It's an interesting thing because I know this from a lot of creators, and actually this is completely how my brain ticks as well. You get into something and you dive into it, 100%, like the whole way, to the detriment of just about everything and anything else around you. Do you think that's sort of a trait I think that lots of creative people have in common, actually?
And I don't know much about the science behind it, but I feel like it must just be your brain's only able to compute one creative thing at a time. Like, at least that's how I feel. Like, if I find it hard to go out and take videos and take photos. It's like two different parts of your brain that have got to work. I don't know if that's true, but it's what it feels like. And you're looking at, when you're looking at stills, you're looking at foregrounds, you're looking at, framing a whole picture. And when you're doing video, you're really looking at getting the details to tell the story as well as the wide angles and the close-up. Like, there's a lot more going on. And so often I think I can do it and I come back and I've either spent too much time on one or the other. Generally, if it's filming it, that's what takes up sort of the most energy. So you're like, oh, I'll just snap a photo when I see a good shot. But you either completely forget or your mind's just in like one creative mode, and it's really hard to swap. But I think you're also right. But in terms of most creatives, you want to get better, you want to improve your craft, and it's hard to for me, I was doing a lot of art, and once I started photography, then all I thought about was photography. Like, ideas didn't come to me for painting, where they came to me for, finding a new shot, finding, I did a lot of, and I still do a lot of action sport photography. I find a location. I'm like, this is a great spot to put a couple of lights and get a skateboarder here or whatever. Or on the winter, is looking for locations to shoot snowboarding. And those ideas will like pop to me when I'm driving it used to be like a new idea for some artwork would pop to me when I was like, whatever, sitting back and thinking about nothing. And then an idea comes up, right? When you're just sort of not trying to think of them.
Yeah. It's one of these things. I think it's actually, that kind of trait of like really being able to like hyper focus on something. I think for creative brains, it's quite important because actually that's really how we get better. It's by not getting distracted by other things and by just putting all of your energy into this one thing. Because, I remember I used to be in the music industry, for a long time. And it's funny, I say this all the time. I draw a lot of parallels on this podcast between photography and music. Because they're very similar traits. And a lot of my friends don't understand how, I could, shift career path from music into, to photography. And I always keep explaining to them, it's to you as an outsider, this might seem weird, but for me, this is completely logical. And actually, I don't really see much of a difference between one and the other. It's still kind of the same thing. I'm still making stuff.
Yeah, totally. And I'm sure ideas pop into your head about some. And if you're able to do the music and the photography at the same time, and you can still get ideas about some riff, or I'm not sure what instrument you play, but
it's
some beat or whatever.
Well, that's right. But that's actually
that's great.
Yeah, but that's not what's happening. So, I'm like...
It's what is. I had the same friends. Like, I just don't think of artwork or ideas to paint something now that, well, it's been a while now, 10, 15 years I've had the camera. So it's really just the photography ideas that come. But I think it's to do with we get satisfaction out of developing, right, and learning.
Yes.
And I started playing golf again a couple of years ago. I played a lot when I was a junior. And I just had done my time and I was stopped playing golf. I never thought about it. And then I picked it up a few years ago and I was mountain biking quite a lot as well. And I'd go out to the garage to get my mountain bike and end up just going, I'll get my golf clubs. And I ended up going to the golf course more often than I took the bike out.
Right.
And I think there's something there where it was just very enjoyable to get back to like learning something again. And into progressing all the time. And I think that's the same with your creative outlet. To be like this one, I'm actually achieving development, and that's fun. Like getting better at something's fun.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it. It's the getting better at something. That's the thing. Which is why for my part, I couldn't really do anything creative just as a on the side hobby type of a thing, because I would always feel I want to devote more time to it. And, at the same time, I've always thought like, well, how can I make a living doing this? Because actually I really don't want to do anything else. A friend of mine said this to me the other day. We're talking about, he was talking about Germans, as typical, like in inverted commas, German traits, character traits and stuff. And it was this thing like, we're talking about, well, in Germany, when you grow up in Germany, the average person's thinking is very much sort of, it goes along a very specific track. Like you finish school, you go to university, whatever, and then, you work for Mercedes, basically, and that's the thing that you do. And anybody who does anything that's out of the ordinary, that doesn't really fit into any of those lanes, is immediately kind of thought of as like, well, a bit weird, or almost like looked down upon. And when he said it to me, I thought like, well, actually, yeah, kind of, I sort of get that, because I was always the only one who didn't like aspire to working for Bosch or Siemens or like Mercedes or something like that.
You were the odd one out.
I was totally the odd one out. It's funny when we have like high school reunions, which we have like every 5 years or whatever. I take the time to fly over and meet with old friends, and it's always it's funny when I hear those stories, like and some of the questions I think I get the oddest questions, like, do you pay tax in the UK? I haven't seen you in freaking 10 years, dude. Is that the only thing you can ask me? It's, it's a tax.
Really,
all right.
They're just looking at ways to not pay themselves. They're like, oh, I'll move to the UK if that's the way.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. But now you're originally from New Zealand.
Yeah.
And of course, I've mentioned at the beginning, we're going to talk about Vallerret in a minute. Did the love for the outdoors originate in New Zealand for you?
I presume so. I grew up in the mountains. I grew up snowboarding, mountain biking, and playing golf and whatever. We would do family trips. Our family holidays were generally camping at a lake not too far away, an hour's drive or something. Yeah, I think so. I lived in Australia for a few years, and I had a great time. I was surfing and stuff, and I noticed I was getting I can't say depressed. I was definitely not depressed, but it just wasn't as energetic or as happy every day as I thought. I felt like I had been. And I realized that I hadn't been in the mountains for a couple of years. And since then, I've just chased the mountains. And I don't know. I feel like people that grew up on the ocean or grew up on the coast, and that's where they it feels good to go back there or to be surrounded by that. And I grew up in the mountains, and it's kind of feels like my natural habitat.
Yeah. So you mentioned at the beginning you originally studied landscape architecture.
Yeah. I did.
How did that fit into the whole thing?
My dad had a landscaping business. I landscaped a lot. There's sort of odd jobs in the summer and the like. And I tell you how that happened. I was trying to think of how I ended up getting there. But when I was in Australia, I was playing rugby and landscaping and surfing, and I blew my knee out. I had to go get a knee reconstruction. And it kind of, I don't know, I guess I was 20 or so, 19 or something. I kind of got scared thinking if I rely on my body to earn me money in terms of physical labor, and this happens in 10 years and I can't, do physical work anymore, what am I going to do? So that took me to go and I found a course that I thought looked fun, and landscape architecture sort of fit the bill. In hindsight, I worked as a landscape architect for a year or so, and then I worked in various landscaping companies. Afterwards, it was a 4-year course. It's pretty intense. I essentially became an architect, and I didn't really go down that career, but I used those skills I learned nearly every day here. You just learn design skills, and you can kind of apply that to anything. I mean, the more you specialize, there's definitely like legal side of things that you'll learn as an architect, and working with product design and stuff, you'll learn different laws of manufacturing and whatever, and the materials you use. But essentially, the core basics of it is learning how to design. So I don't regret ever doing that, and I had a hell of a good time at university. And I think when looking back, I could have done a lot of different things. I could have done a photography course. I could have enjoyed a business course. I think, Did you ever end up as a landscape architect?
Did you ever think back then that you were going to end up designing photography gloves, though?
No. I actually, the whole dream was that I always wanted to have my own business. So I went to be a landscape architect with the future goal of owning my own business as a landscape company. I'd build that up and then sort of design and implement, and then eventually just drive around checking on my projects and have other people designing and building for me. That was kind of the goal. And in reality, after working for a few years, you just don't. It wasn't that fulfilling, mainly because of its business. You need to make money, and where your bread and butter comes from was not that fun. It was very basic, and like landscaping, you're cutting lawns and you're pulling out weeds, and I want to be building really cool rock features and designing spaces and having big projects where you can really sink your teeth into. So that kind of took me away from that aspect, but yeah.
The reason why I'm asking is because, when I speak to people who, build up businesses similar to, to your business, to Vallerret, I'm thinking of Larry Tiefenbrunn, for example. He created Platypod because he was out in the desert one time hiking, carrying a massive tripod, and just thought there's got to be a better way of stabilizing my camera rather than carrying these tripods around with me. This is what would led him to think up the idea of the Platypod. What was that moment that basically, got you, where the penny dropped and he went, you know what we need is some really decent, awesome photography gloves. What was that moment?
Yeah, it was twofold. I've been chasing the winter since I discovered that I needed to be around mountains. And myself and my now wife sort of took us around the world. Ended up in Alaska, training sled dogs, and we just had the experience of shooting northern lights and being out there and taking turns running inside. And we kind of had a fire as well to stay warm, but it just wasn't enough. Once you get cold, you got to go warm up again. And so we were kind of running in and out. We had some friends visiting us, both in Alaska, and then when we came back to Europe, we did a similar thing up in the north of Sweden. And it was just multiple times our friends who I snowboarded with had turned to photography, and were mentioning something similar of like, need some gloves that did this. It kind of wasn't like a light bulb moment. It was more just like it sat in the back of your mind for a while. And then I had that urge to build my own business. And I've had that since a young age. And so when I said about like, I need to get something off the ground, and then we started throwing ideas around, what's a problem we can solve. I'm an architect, or educated at least, as an architect, and my wife's into marketing. She did a business degree in marketing and stuff, so it paired nicely with like trying to find out what was a physical product and a problem we could solve. And so that was when the spark kind of went off of like, our experience in the last few years of being in the Arctic and doing photography and stuff, that was a problem we had, and we can solve that. And I have the skills to design the physical product. She has the skills to like get it to market, a sense marketing, and find people that would want to pay for it. So that was kind of the combination of those two things.
The interesting thing about that is,
yeah.
So, I mean, the interesting thing about that is that there's a massive gap in the middle, which is the whole manufacturing part. Because I mean, that's like I think that's where most people go, I don't know how to do that. Because I'm thinking, you look at something and you go like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if, and then you go, well, how are we actually going to make that thing? That's I can imagine that being like a huge obstacle right there.
And what's awesome is when you're young and naive, or just naive, don't even have to be young, but you just dive in. And I think knowing what we know now about business, if you really knew everything that you had to do to get off the ground and the struggles you'd go through, it'd be so hard to start. And I think the human brain is great at just putting off the reality of stuff and being like, let's just go.
That's exactly why this podcast is still in existence.
Yeah. It's crazy. So yeah, manufacturing was a big thing, and I have feel like I have good problem solving skills, and I think that's gotten me sort of around the world on very small budgets, and believing I've got 2 weeks left of money, but I'll figure it out and I can still do this thing. And I think that's helped, just with running into the darkness, essentially, thinking we're going to figure it out, and we got there by figuring it out. We actually started. I had drawn some pictures and sort of graphic design them and brush them up in Photoshop. Very, very raw, but they look like a bad picture more than just a drawing. And we set up a website, and Stina ran some advertisers for a couple of weeks, and we essentially sold the drawings. we didn't take any money, but if we got enough people to sort of go to check out, we then deemed it as, people want this product. So that was like, we did that before we went and figured out how to do manufacturing, just to prove the concept. And then from a manufacturing aspect, it took a good year, and 20 manufacturers I was talking with and getting samples from, and most of them were pretty bad. Some of the manufacturers weren't manufacturers; they were just middlemen and handing off the projects to actual factories. So we ended up finding a good one that came back with a really quality product, and we still work with them today. Actually, it's been 10 years now.
Hey, let me just jump in real quick to tell you about the amazing sponsor of this episode, Platypod. Platypod offers innovative camera support systems designed to unleash your creativity. With their stable, versatile, and portable solutions, you can capture stunning shots like never before. And I'm not just saying that. As the host of the Camera Shake podcast, I can personally vouch for Platypod's incredible products. They've become an integral part of the show. In fact, I'm surrounded by various Platypod products holding up lights, cameras, microphones, and so on. It's really helped to transform the way I make the show and the way I shoot at home, in the studio, and on location. But don't just take my word for it. Explore Platypod's website at www.platypod.com to discover their range of products, including the Platypod Extreme, Platypod tripod heads, and the brand new handle, of course. Make sure to follow Platypod on Instagram and Facebook at Platypod Tripods for exclusive updates, tips, and giveaways. By choosing Platypod, you're not only investing in your photography, but you're also supporting the Camera Shake Photography podcast. Thanks again to Platypod, our amazing sponsor. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps. Yeah, because you just had your 10-year anniversary.
Yeah, we debated a little bit of when it was 10 years and when is the anniversary. So
yeah.
Anyway, we deemed it as when we like really became a business, as opposed to when we were just doing drawings in the bedroom.
Yeah,
but so it's 10 years now.
How did you come up with the initial designs? Did you go out and like look at competitors, for example? Were there any products like that out on the market already to that degree? And because sometimes that's the thing, you look at products that are already out there, and you think like, well, I can improve on that because I've got these ideas and nobody's making that. Or of course, sometimes there's a situation where that product just doesn't exist, to start with. How did you go about creating your first designs? What was the main?
Well, I think that was a big part of what gave us, the courage to move forward. Was there was already products out there, so it just proved that there was a need for them. Where we found the gap was that no one was really thinking of it from a design specifically for photographers. They had mostly been designed for other uses, iPhones or whatever, and photographers had found them, like army or hunting gloves or fishing gloves, and so they, the functionality was same, but it just wasn't tailored to a photographer. So there was that part, and I forgot the actual question. How do we get around the first designs?
Yeah.
I bought a bunch of gloves. I bought what I could find that was something similar, or also just being snowboarding. For a long time, I had a lot of gloves, so I just tore them apart, looked at how they were put together, and it's a pretty intense thing to make. That's quite small. There's a lot of you can't just put two sheets of paper together. There's your hands 3D and it moves in certain ways, right? And so there is a lot sort of from a design aspect and getting the pattern right that is involved. So it just took them apart, looked at it, analyzed why there were certain shapes, and then said about making them functional. And with the systems we came up with of flipping your fingers so you could then use your camera, and adjust your dials. If at any stage I had to take the glove off to do anything, it was like that was a failed design. So it was a lot of sweat and pulling hairs out when you're like, this was a good idea, and I had to take my glove off because it just pinched or did something weird. So it was a lot of trial and error to get to a point where the glove fitted well. Because like a ski glove, you can have pretty bulky, and as long as it's warm, the fits. There's a lot of room there to it not fit so great. But our gloves are so technical. You're using small equipment. You need to really have a good feel for it. Like fit was a big thing, and worked on that a lot. And then the functionality of then being able to operate your camera was an extra part to just having like a well-fitted glove. So we had a lot of different design trial and errors to where we came to, and then we kept tweaking it, and we still tweak it now. And a lot of our adjustments and new designs come from the customer feedback on what they want to have, what they like to have, and where they think things work or could be improved. Which is great for inspiration, but it's also, you get a lot of comments from people who they're generally good ideas, just not understanding of the manufacturing or actually how complicated it is, right? So, but it's always valuable, and we'll find sort of a balance between what people would like to see and what's sort of possible from a proper production aspect.
Well, your gloves, I tell you what I really like about those, because I've had photography gloves in the past, but one of my major gripes has always been the fact that a lot of gloves I've had in the past use like a push button design, when you flip the finger back type of thing. And I'm just wearing one of your gloves here. The thing I really like is that magnet thing. It's so simple, but it's so bloody useful. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's such a simple idea.
Way. Yeah, and it works great, and it keeps the caps out of the way, and essentially it's really for when you just have the camera towards your face that the flaps are kept back and sort of not blocking you or getting in the way when they fold down again. So
modern cameras often do have touchscreen, right? Practically, for intents and purposes, all cameras really have touchscreens these days, and you're constantly having to change settings on them, and you constantly need to free up a finger. Because what I found in the past is that a lot of time, even though some gloves have like whatever you call them, like touchpad activated fingertips, whatever you call it, it doesn't really work very well most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, you're still, the skin on your fingers tight. You can push what you want, and you're quite accurate with it, right? And then you're putting a bit of fabric in between that. I mean, most of our models now do have touchscreen, or it's like a conductive fabric that'll work really great for your phones and stuff. But you are, your finger's always going to be better. And so now you can still flip your finger and do that really detailed stuff you need to do, or if it's just to swipe your phone and answer a call or whatever. The conductive fabric still works really well.
Yeah,
you're right. It's you can't compare a touchscreen fabric with a glove to like how well your finger works.
Yeah, and then there's always tiny little wheels and screws to operate. So I really like the fact that you can take the fingertips off and just flip them back. That's very cool. I like it a lot.
Thank you.
So yeah, I've been using it for the first time the other day because it was cold enough, basically, for the first time.
Yeah.
And yeah, all right.
And you've got a great model there for London.
Yes.
Duke. Nice stylish street glove.
Yeah, so that's that's the other thing. We'll talk about your product range because it really goes from urban street photography type gloves in like Central Europe, climate wise, if you want to call it that, to like all out, full on, mega Arctic, let's go discover the North Pole or something type gloves. Now,
yeah, we said about from the start, the idea was to have a range of gloves, and I mean, I drew a lot of inspiration, and I still do, from snowboarding and just spending so long with snowboard gloves. And I was a bum snowboarder, so I didn't have the finances to to buy a lot of stuff, but I had I would wear gardening gloves, and I had what you would call like pipe gloves. They're like sort of mountain biking gloves, but you wear them snowboarding. Um, when you're riding the pipe and you're doing a lot of activity, so you're staying warm and you're generally pretty close to a hut or something. So from that to like a thin glove to, if you're going backcountry snowboarding, you've got something that's like properly insulated, a big gauntlet cuff on it, and these kind of things. So thinking of the same range for photographers, you want to stay warm, but you don't. Well, one being too warm is just as annoying as being cold. But also as you get warmer, or as you need to stay warmer, you need more insulation, and the products get bigger. So having a range that fits where you need. So like in London, you don't need a massive big mitt, because it just sort of, there's better options and less bulky options to do what you need to do, but still stay warm. But in the end, it comes down to like, you just have to stay warm is the priority. So when you come up to Norway, when you go into the Arctic, and you have to give away some dexterity and some of that finesse in order to stay warm. So the gloves get bigger and keep you out there, no matter where you are, and depending on what the weather is.
What did your first prototype look like?
Oh, it's so cool. I say that because it was, I'm not sure everyone thinks it's cool. I went out one night, I had drawn up the patterns, and I went out one weekend with some friends, and I came home, and Sten had stayed and sewn a prototype. And I came home and I was so excited. It was it looked awesome, but she was not impressed. She's like, this is so bad. I'm like, but look at the potential. Like, this is the first one. And she would have learned how to like sew the fourchets and all the tiny stuff. So we still have it as, I just think it's so awesome. It's, I don't think anyone can actually fit it because it doesn't really work, but it was just, for me, it was like a great step forwards within to see the potential we had for me to draw the patterns and for her to sew it. And we carried on doing that for a couple of years, sewing prototypes. She would sew them and I would design the patterns and find the fabrics and get them to a point where it was nowhere near a sellable product, but it was enough to show the manufacturer, along with the drawings, what we were trying to achieve. And then they would send back a proper glove, and we would adjust it from there.
It's an interesting process because I always wonder what happens in that sort of situation. You send a prototype to a manufacturer, do they just look at it and go, whatever,
Yeah.
Or like what is that process like? How do you even? I mean, how do you first of all go about finding a manufacturer to start with? Like, what is?
I think with the online world now, in the last 10, 15 years, it's definitely easier than it was before that. And with places like Alibaba, and there's a lot of sort of channels you can go and find suppliers. Finding good ones and working with them is a sort of a different story, but you got to start somewhere. And then we went and visited the factory and built the relationship from there. And they make high quality ski gloves. If I go to the factory and walk around the floor, I'll see some very big brands being made there. So we've had a collaboration where they've also had to learn how to make the photography gloves. It's a slower process. There's a lot more going on than a ski glove, but essentially we're making a ski glove that's functional because it's waterproof, it's warm, and etc. So it was they've grown, or like they've learned how to execute on our vision essentially, and there's just a lot of back and forth. I have always thought it would be so great to go and live there for 3 months while we're sort of product developing, but I also don't want to live there for 3 months and have a family and the like. So we send a lot of stuff back and forwards, and there's a lot of emails, and just from my architecture days, I send very comprehensive instructions in terms of drawings and designs and stuff.
How long is that process from let's say from idea to prototype to actually having a fully complete version?
Yeah, it
That's
still
also
takes us 10 months
right.
from now. Even if we're from sending over the initial designs to getting a sample back to adjusting that to a point where we then that kind of includes production at the end of it as well, to when we can get on the shelves. So it's still, even though we have many different patterns and models to take from in terms of how they were constructed, it's still almost a year. So we have to, like, I've already sent off the new designs for the next season. What is that? 26, 27. So we and it would be nice to even work further ahead, but there's a lot of planning going in the future, and what we see is happening with our range. We try to keep a model in for 3 to 4. It's generally averages around about 4 years, and then we'll look at doing an update and changing it up. So yeah, they're kind of on a rotation where we will bring out a new model, or we might see some customers got an idea and we're like, yeah, that fits in, that's a good idea, that's a new model, or we'll just update an old model and bring that out. But they're kind of in a rotation. So every year we bring out a couple new models. They'll either replace an old one or be an update.
I guess that's another really important thing, is like being aware of the product cycle, just knowing, where can we add on models potentially, where's the gap in the product range, and what's the word? What is the product life cycle? Like, when do we have to bring out a new model now? Is that something, was your background in architecture and design, was it helpful in that respect, or was that something that you really had to learn on the go, as it were?
I think there's sort of two parts, and as you say, like, I can design something and then you can market it, and there's a whole part in the middle which is like actually developing the product, getting it manufactured. So I all I could draw on was my experience as a landscape architect. So I was sending off full design packages, all laid out for them, and I think they're generally used to just getting a drawing or an idea or sort of a sample of some sort and say, let's adjust it this way. Again, I forgot the actual question. I go off on a tangent.
Well, I'm just saying.
Yeah, so the glove cycle. No, that's something we came up with in terms of what we think is sort of a sustainable product life. I feel like most ski companies, ski gloves are new every year, and really they're only just updating a color change maybe, or there's not a whole lot of difference year to year on the glove models, and I feel like it just generates a lot of waste, and something we're very conscious of. We're definitely, as a business in manufacturing, adding to the problem of sustainability, the environment. So being able to have a product that lasts a few years on the line, we can then, I feel like we limit the waste we're having by doing that, and not having a lot of excess stock left over from last year, bringing out new stock this year. And really the only difference is a color change, but because it was last year's stock, we now have to either, I don't know what companies do.
Yeah.
We give away product to a lot of friends or people around. If it's not sellable, might just have some small defect, or give them to charities and things. And I don't know what companies do that are constantly in a new product cycle every season. It generates a lot of unnecessary waste, I think.
Yeah. I can just imagine it's incredibly difficult to really, to actually just bring even the first product to market. I'm guessing once you've done it once, then you build on that experience base, and it's going to be much easier to bring the next, the next model out. But did you start with just one model of glove, or did you start with the whole product range right from the get-go?
No, it built over the years. Yeah, we started with one, which was sort of a similar climate, winter range is what you have. It was very much just sort of a shell with a little bit of insulation. So we started off with that. We went to Kickstarter, and then with our feedback on Kickstarter, people wanted a slightly different color. I think we had too much white and black with that, so we ended up bringing out the same glove in two different sort of colorways. The first real season we had, and then from there, I think we next season had 3 different gloves, and the next season we might have had 5 different gloves, and grew it to a point where we kind of filled out the range we had wanted to fill out, and then it became more about improving the different models and filling in the gaps.
One thing I really like about your products, really, is I don't know, and this isn't like a an advertising episode or something. It's the reason why we're talking is because I really like the product, and there's always when I really like something, I'm of the opinion that more people should know about it. So that's not really, one of the things I really like about some of the stuff that you do is just how well thought out it is and how specific it is in many degrees, to what photographers need. One thing I saw on your website is for instance, you've sort of expanded to other clothing items, but there's a long sleeve, for instance, which has like a built-in lens cloth and a chest pocket for a battery, which, as I have learned, having shot in the Arctic, is bloody useful. That's the thing.
Yeah, totally. And it comes from one, as a business, we're looking at ways where we can keep growing and stuff, but also just from our own problems we're having within being in the winter. And a lot of my snowboard jackets don't have inside pockets. So, and that's what I'll be wearing if I'm out shooting. And so I have nowhere to put the battery to keep it warm close to my body. And if I can put it in the outside pockets, but that doesn't really help. So then having, wearing it now, actually, the merino with a little zipper you can stick your pocket, put the battery in, or we have another version. And we're actually bringing out some more apparel later this year. Just keep that secret. The little teaser for you, which is sort of built out that idea more with a lot more features and pockets, and
because if you're listening to this and you're sitting in the Arizona desert or something, you're wondering why is that even a thing? Let me tell you, one of the first things I learned when I went up to the Arctic was one of the first things our mutual friend Dave Williams taught me was that you want to keep batteries close to your body because the colder they get, the less charge they hold, and so at a point they're going to be completely useless. So if you're out in the snowfield, basically shooting, you want to keep your batteries really close to your body, so you keep them warm with your body heat. Hence, you need pockets close to your body to actually keep your batteries warm. So, which is why,
like none of my armpits, you just to get the extra little bit out of them, you just keep them warm for a while, and then you can get a couple more shots off.
So it's a real thing when you're in a cold environment. People who haven't shot in those kind of environments won't necessarily understand that, but it's a real thing. So which is why when I saw that, that long sleeve, I'm thinking, oh man, I should have had that last time I was in Lofoten because it would have saved me a whole lot of hassle. But there you go. Next time.
Totally. And I think I shoot with a Nikon and I have a Sony, and Nikon batteries, I just have one spare one, and that I've never had a problem. But I think with the mirrorless cameras, they just use up so much more juice. So it's a much bigger problem with the mirrorless cameras to keep the batteries alive and making sure they are somewhere warm so that they're ready when you need them.
One cool thing I've actually noticed, and this is it's a little camera geekery, but Nikon, the Z8 has sort of like almost like a what they call it. It's like it's not night vision, but basically you can switch the screen so that you can operate it in dark environments. And actually what happens is, so basically it doesn't confuse your eyes by giving off too much light, so you can actually see in the dark.
Mm.
And all the controls change to red, in the viewfinder. So even if you're looking through the viewfinder, your eyes don't get frazzled by looking at something that's very bright when you're actually looking at something that's very dark somewhere. Um,
Yeah.
and but what that does is it also saves you a whole ton of battery power. So
Yeah, that's genius.
so that's a cool function.
I mean, shooting in the dark, and especially like in the dark anyway, but in winter, the screen makes the image look so much brighter than it is, and the amount of times I've come back and the images are just so underexposed.
Yeah.
So that's really cool if they can, if they switch sort of, I guess it's like backlit or whatever, a different way of lighting it than it normally is, to really see more like it is in reality.
It's super useful, when you're shooting Northern Lights, for example. This is the thing. So, when Dave and I went out to shoot the Aurora, I mean, you really want ultimately you want to turn the screen on the back off so that your eyes don't get, because half the time, especially depending on what the conditions are like, but you might not necessarily see the Northern Lights with your eyes that strongly. So your eyes have to get used to the night sky and everything. And then the minute you look at something like a very bright camera screen, it just freaks your eyes out again. So
there's some stat there, and it's actually like a really long time for your eyes to adjust.
Yeah,
it's like 15 minutes or something. I don't remember the exact amount, but it's not just like a couple of blinks and you're good. It takes a while.
Yeah, it takes a long time, and it's when you're trying, especially when you're trying to point your camera into the direction of wherever the Northern Lights are developing, and you can't really see what's going on. It's just impossible. This is the one thing, it's the first time I went out with Dave. He kept saying to me like, "Look at the sky, can you see it?" I'm like, I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't think, he goes like, "Oh yeah, it's getting green. Can you see it?" I'm like, "Oh, is it green or is it blue? I don't know." That was, and I remember he stopped the car, we got out, and he goes like, "Oh yeah, it's happening." And at that point, I'm literally there. I'm thinking, well, maybe this is something that you can't see with the naked eye. Maybe you need a camera to see the Northern Lights, right? Maybe that's how it works. And we were just about to get back in the car, and I look up, and the whole sky literally just exploded. It just went crazy. And at that point, I was like, okay, yeah, here we go.
Now you know when you see them.
Like, yeah, exactly.
There is no mistaking it. But unfortunately, not everyone gets that experience. But the more like a common experience is having kind of like a green rainbow.
Yeah,
sort of on the horizon, and that's where if you like do long exposures, the camera sees more than your eyes. But when it's like when you really experience the Northern Lights, there's no mistaking it. It's a hell of a show. It's like, it's fireworks.
Yeah, it's a funny thing.
Which you obviously experienced, but
well, we had over here in the UK, we had last winter we had some some Northern Lights that were visible even in the south of England. And I remember friends going like, "Oh man, I've seen the Northern Lights. It was unbelievable." And you look at the photos and you go, yeah, well, beginners. Because it's a completely different experience. Once you're in the Arctic Oval, in particular, it's mind blowing.
When we were in Sweden with the sled dogs, I would be out looking at them all the time. I was so stoked to see them. But I would go in and tell Stina, be like, "Northern Lights," and she'd just call back, "What's the number?" And I had to come up with a ranking system. So it would be like, because it's cold, right? Like it's -25, and she's already like tugged up, got a blanket, watching TV or something, to get out and put all your clothes on to come and see it. So it was, I don't remember the number, but if it wasn't above an 8, she's like, I'll wait till tomorrow.
Yeah,
I'll wait till it was
It's pretty incredible. I mean, a guy I got to know up there in the Lofoten Islands, Ragnar, he grew up in Iceland. Okay. And so he spent all of his life in the Arctic, basically. And I remember sitting at the bar with him one time, and he goes like, when I was a young man, I used to come home from the pub And I used to look up and I used to think, oh, those damn northern lights again. And you go like, wow, if that is your experience base, where that's the normal,
Yeah.
that to me as a, Central European, it's completely mind blowing. I mean, I, I've only ever seen the Northern Lights really for the first time 2 years ago, and it blew my mind. I didn't. It's one of
Me.
these things where I always say to people when you go to a place like that and you're lucky enough to actually really see them bloom, in its full majestic force. There's something. There was definitely something in my brain that thought, "Is this a special effect?" Like,
Yeah, I gotcha.
especially I remember the first night, it was like, I couldn't quite, I was looking at the sky, it was like, I can't really quite compute what is actually
Yeah.
happening, you know?
You've never seen it before, right? And
Yeah.
when it's really good, I like to explain it as in you're lying on the bottom of a stream and you're watching like the water flow over you,
Yes, exactly.
right? Because that's how it's like these curtains are swimming and moving, and we've only ever looked up and seen stars and the occasional shooting star, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of about the experience you've had of looking into the sky, and then to see this thing like rain down on you, I totally get that. It's like your mind's not sure what to make
Yeah.
of it.
I remember, especially when you're in a place like, like Northern Norway, where you're literally, past the Arctic Circle, or in the Arctic Oval, where all of a sudden there's no such thing as the Northern Lights anymore because it's like all of a sudden they're everywhere. Um, I remember the first time we went out. It was the best way I could describe it. Is like, if you imagine if you had like a bucket full of green paint, and you pour that bucket out, and it was almost like that sort of viscosity that, the whole thing just poured down the sky. It was just unbelievable.
Mm.
The other thing that really freaked me out was the speed at which they can potentially develop. It was just, it's especially with the first few nights. It's like, by the time I had my camera set on a tripod and I was sort of halfway sure that I had anything in focus, they'd already disappeared and were behind me or something.
Yeah, they can come and go in a few minutes, and sometimes they can stay around for hours. And we used to take sled dog tours and snowmobile tours for in the evenings for the Northern Lights. And most of the time it's I mean, Dave will tell you differently because we had to talk to him a couple weeks ago about the science behind it, and really like hunting them and tracking them, which we never did. We just went outside. and so I was just telling the guys that are on our trip where you just have to be outside. Like, you're not going to see them when you're inside. You're not going to see them when you're sleeping. So the longer you can be out during the night, and the higher your chances to see it. But what they will tell you something different, and you can track the solar winds and et cetera, et cetera. He blew my mind with how much he actually goes into like tracking them and hunting them.
Man, it's unbelievable. I mean, I've known Dave for so long, but actually spending time with him and seeing how he works is actually, that in itself is quite mind-blowing. The man tracks about 100 data points every day. Yeah. It's unbelievable. I mean, I tell you what, we were sitting at dinner. So the first time I was out there, I was I was teaching with him, and I was there with a group of people. Let's say we sit at dinner, and Dave would look up and he would go like, right, 15 minutes, we got to be by the van because we got to be at this very specific location. It's going to take us 45 minutes to get there. That's the precise time when there is a hole in the clouds at this specific point, and we have to be on this side of the mountain in order to see it, and that's when we're going to see the Northern Lights. And that's going to happen at like, I don't know, 2:15 a.m. So we leave here at 15. And you drop everything. Because that's why you're there. That's why
blew my mind with the way of approaching it, where you would he somehow tracks it like it's a train coming, and he's going to arrive at that spot, and he's like, okay, if it's going to be there, but we've got cloud cover, where is there a gap in the cloud, and where's the spot to shoot from, and we need to align ourselves to get through that, like to see through that cloud in that direction.
Especially,
and I was like, wow.
Yeah,
To
especially
me, it was always just like you go outside and you hope for the best.
yeah, especially in an environment like the Lofoten Islands. It's because because it's so mountainous. Because the thing is, like, you
Mm.
can be, or you can think you're in the right spot, and just the way that you're looking, you might actually just look at, a 3,000 foot black mountain right in front of you. Then you can't see the sky because there's a bloody mountain right there, right? So need to be on the other side of the mountain, but there's no road there, so you need to know how to even get. It's just, I mean, the whole thing is unbelievable. Um, and it's interesting because since then, I've had a few friends who said like, "Oh yeah, I went to Norway for a couple of weeks. We went on a cruise or whatever, and we're there for 2 weeks and didn't see the Northern Lights at all." And it's like, well, did you get some? I mean, did you get a tracker? Did you hire somebody? No. So I can see how if you're out there on your own, it's literally just pot luck.
Yeah.
What Dave does isn't luck; it's
No,
calculated chaos.
totally.
It's like-
And that was new to me in a way of tracking all the lights like that.
Really?
It is an amazing spot, Lofoten. I was up there a handful of years ago, splitboarding.
Right.
And as soon as I got off the plane, my buddies were already there to pick me up. I just threw them my bags to pack the car, and I was off. Got the camera in hand. I'm like, this mountain, and it wasn't even like I was just shooting from the hip. The light was okay. It was just the scenery itself was amazing. These jagged shark tooth peaks just rise out of the ocean.
Yeah.
We get to our cabin, and I haven't seen these guys I was with. I haven't seen them for a few years, and we're having a few beers and getting dinner ready. And I'm like, look, you all have to just give me an hour. I'm going to go down to the shoreline because it's sunset in like 20 minutes, and this place is magic. Like, ended up getting most of them to come with me, and they sat around on the rocks while I was busy setting up compositions and framing this mountain, and the light was coming there. But you're totally right. Anywhere you look is a great shot. And it's just something also about what's awesome about doing like those adventures you said and having those experiences. Yeah, the images is one, but just living it, like just experiencing is, you have the photo to bring back and be like, I was there, I took this photo, but it relives the experience of it by seeing that, and you can't really beat that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Having traveling experiences.
Exactly. And no matter whether you're into landscape photography or you want to, give it a shot and quite literally and photograph the Northern Lights or whatever it is, it's such a fantastic environment. Northern Norway, highly recommended.
Yeah.
So how did I want to come back to your manufacturing process? Once you managed to get the first your first set of gloves onto the market, what did that feel like when you realized like it's you've done it, it's actually out there for people to buy?
I think it's scary. It's one part you're excited, you're like, we've got this here, we've made some sales, people are buying them, we're solving people's problems. Like the idea is working, so there's some excitement and sort of celebration there, but I think there's also just becomes a lot of fear because you've put something out there that you've worked so hard for, and it feels like it's like a baby, for lack of a better word. Here's my here's my baby, treat it well, and then they'll come back and be like, your baby's crying. All right, or there's something happens with the product, or some people love it, some people don't love it, and you feel like it's a personal attack. So actually, for a few years, it was both of those things, exciting and a lot of fear. Fear that it would go away was one, like we finally made it to work, and maybe overnight it could disappear. And also having sort of, some people really like it, and some people say it didn't fit properly, and etc. In those early years, we're still figuring it out. We were doing our best and learning the whole manufacturing process and what was capable once you kind of go from making a sample which is very hands-on and kind of like boutique, to like production, where you can actually get thousands of gloves produced. And there are some differences between that. So there was a lot of ironing out to do in those first few years. And I feel like there was a mix of excitement and fear. We definitely celebrated once we'd reached our goal on Kickstarter, which allowed us to move forwards. I think I talked to other entrepreneurs, and everyone's had this similar experience. It doesn't matter what business you're creating. There is a mix of excitement and fear, and it's taken a while to sort of grow through that and be like, we've now, been here 10 years. Hopefully we're here for another 10 years, but the fear is no longer there. It's like, we also accept that, well, one, everyone has different sized hands. Sometimes a customer is just not going to fit our gloves. Unfortunately, hands are not a uniform thing that everyone has. It's either you're in a medium and this is your exact dimensions or not. So we've also gotten better at just accepting that we can't please everyone. And as long as we do good by everyone, and if someone's not happy, we'll totally take the gloves back and be like, okay, thanks for giving us a try, and good luck finding something that you like better or works better for you. And that's sort of helped with being more on the excitement side of things than the fear side of things.
I think that's quite an important thing, because I think a lot of the time it's very easy, and I think maybe this is just human nature, but it's very easy to sort of, to get carried away with negative comments, for example. And I think, anybody who runs a business, no matter whether it's, whether you're running a glove company or whether you're running a photography business, or, I used to run a private music school for 12 years. It's the realization, I think, that not every person is your customer, and that's cool. That's fine. It's like you say, you can't please everyone,
It's a hard thing to learn, or it's something that is hard to, it's easy to say, and it's hard to really adapt as like, okay. Because it feels like a personal attack when someone they have something negative to say, and being like, okay, you're not attacking me as a person, and trying to separate those two things.
Yeah, and it's really, it's true in so many different ways. I mean, it's even true for, like, no matter what you do, whether you're running a YouTube channel or or podcasts like this, with the thing about dealing with negative comments is always, some people don't read them. Some people get really upset by them. I don't really get that many. I'll be honest, I don't really get that many negative comments. I'm in a lucky position where when I do get a negative comment, I can read it and I can basically say, does that person have a point or not? And if they do have a point, I can work on that.
But you're such a nice guy, Kersten. That's why you don't get any negative comments.
No, I think it's such a small podcast. That's what it is, really.
Yeah, your family are too nice. So, like, your family are too nice to write something negative. They're always just saying something nice. I mean,
you occasionally you get, you get like, there's different types of comments. Sometimes you get comments with, I don't agree with what that guest said, like, blah, blah, blah. Say, like, for instance, a good example would be street photography. Somebody says, well, I think you should take one lens and just shoot that one lens. And somebody else goes, well, I think that's nonsense because, a zoom lens is so much better and I always have 3 lenses in my bag and that's how I do it. And I don't agree. Okay, fine. It's a matter of agreement or disagreement. It's okay. You do your thing.
Yeah.
Perfect, But for instance, I remember, somebody said early on, said like, I found it really difficult because the guest is always talking over, the presenter, me, is always talking over the guest. And, this is the thing where I rewatched the episode or re-listened to it and I'm thinking, is that really true? Did I do that? And if I did, then I'd be mindful of that or more mindful of that next time around. And that's just a way that we can all improve. This is a useful comment. I don't necessarily see it as negative.
No, sure. And the person was giving sort of, I would say criticism, but like, what's the word where it's like constructive criticism?
Constructive, yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. as opposed to just like, this guy sucks, he's a dick.
Yeah, exactly. These gloves are rubbish.
Ricky Gervais has a good bit on that. You must know Ricky Gervais,
Yeah, sure.
a comedian, and where the internet is the equivalent, or comments on the internet is equivalent of someone going to the supermarket and going past like a job board or a pin-up board and pulling off someone's guitar. Someone is like, I give guitar lessons, right? And they pull off the tag, call them up, and be like, I don't want guitar lessons, right? Like, it's the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's the internet's like that, where it's like, okay, that content, that whatever it is not for you. You don't need to get on there and be like, I don't want to see this.
Yeah. Does it make it difficult sometimes? Because for business like Vallerret, which is so visual, it's a photography glove. We're talking about photography. Social media plays such an important role. Is that sometimes difficult to deal with that side of social media, or have you learned to completely just actually kind of ignore that for the most part?
I got to be honest, I am not the one in charge of our social media anymore.
Cool.
So for me, I don't spend a lot of time on social media, and but I was doing it at some stage, and I feel like it was being within the photography space and putting out content in the photography space and going through it all. I felt like it was not negative. Like, you got a lot of inspiration. You talk to a lot of people, and I felt like it mostly drove me to do better in photography or come up with new ideas. The only downside is that you go down rabbit holes and a couple hours will be gone and you're doing something else. So it is, yeah. The negative comment side of things, we luckily don't have that on social media. At least I haven't experienced too much. There's something, an old one. Mostly it's because we've got some ads running, and someone has seen it that doesn't want anything to do with photography, and then they start interacting with the ad and being like, "Stop showing this to me," and you're like, "Yeah, you've just made it worse for yourself," or like, it's I haven't had to deal with trolls essentially.
Now, you mentioned Kickstarter earlier. Kickstarter is an interesting platform, I feel, because it gives, especially startups, really a fighting chance in actually, putting, getting a product into manufacturing. Do you think that without a platform like Kickstarter, do you think, creating a company like Vallerret would still be possible today, or would it just be infinitely harder? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think, the times have changed for Kickstarter. It's not the same as it was 10, 15 years ago. It's a lot about pay to play now, and what's still good about it is you get to fund your campaign, you get to sell your product before you go and spend the money on actually producing it. The downside is you pretty much have to do all the work yourself anyway. So you could just set up a website. You have to get all the traffic to Kickstarter now, and it's what I've heard. I have only run the one campaign we did 10 years ago, but from what I hear now is you have to really drive all the traffic there anyway. So you might as well just set up a pre-order website and send traffic there. I guess the difference between the both is people, can trust Kickstarter at least as much as Kickstarter can control who's on there selling stuff, as opposed to some random website where you're going to give the money before you get the product. But in sort of on a wider view, it's great. Like, the idea of proving concept, getting funding to go and to produce the thing that you started creating, it's changed the game for sure for starting up and getting going. You also get a lot, like, from a design aspect, you get a lot of feedback, so you have the ability to change and tweak the design before you actually go to manufacturing, which is another benefit, as opposed to doing a full production run and then getting the feedback.
Because that's the problem,
So
really.
there's a lot of benefits. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the thing when you first start out. You know, you either have a lot of investment to actually absorb all of that kind of stuff, or you essentially pre-fund the manufacturing process through something like Kickstarter.
Yeah. No, it was a different good thing. I just think it's I haven't interacted with it any campaigns recently, but I've heard that it's just harder to do
Yeah,
essentially to get off the ground. And
you don't know.
I guess a lot of people have been burnt too. There's a lot of people who,
Yeah.
whether or not they were trying to just take people's money or their project just failed. I mean, we actually sold gloves before we went to Kickstarter. We did a little test run with our factory, and I can order a small amount of samples. So I think we ordered 50 to 100 gloves, and we sold those as a test. So we actually did the whole pre-run of sort of production, shipping, and sending out before we went to Kickstarter. And I think people who have been burnt, that's generally where they get burnt, is they think they have it all lined up, but then when they finally do production, shipping, fulfillment, they don't calculate the costs, the time, the effort, the whatever, the defects from the factory, and fix them before they go out. Or so I'm not sure what the problem is, but there's a lot in there that if you don't iron out before you promise people a lot of stuff, then you can get burnt.
And often, I think sometimes it's just a thing where you just realize that maybe there really actually isn't a market or big enough market for that particular product, and then at least you don't.
Which is a great thing with doing Kickstarter, is you don't get funded and you go, oh, I can move on to the next idea.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I'm always interested in knowing, really, with seasonal products, like gloves, for example, is how do you deal with that seasonality of it? The winter gloves. What happens in the summer months? Is what I want.
Yeah. We chill out.
Excellent. I like it.
Yeah. So for a few years, we bought a house. There was a lot to do. We had kids, and we were doing up the house and doing other stuff. I still have some work to do. Like a lot of the design and manufacturing happens throughout sort of the summer into autumn, and but sort of just after springtime, when our season dies down, it's nice to take a bit of time off and wind down. And yeah, the seasonality, it was nice from a lifestyle. It's a little harder as a business. So we have created a new brand a couple of years ago, and we sell golf gloves. So now we've got the summer winter thing going, and it's still very new and very much in its baby steps. But from a business aspect, we kind of needed something to take us over the summer months. And we have some things in the pipeline for Vallerret to also take us through a bit of the summer as well. Coming hopefully in development in the next year or two. We'll see.
Do you find is there like a big difference at all between like different markets, like the European market, for example, and North America? Do you find, are there any major differences, or is it by and large, does it work the same?
I think from a consumer aspect, it's different. From in terms of their purchasing behavior, and Amazon is just so big in the States, and the consumers, they buy a lot on Amazon, and they're used to the Amazon service, free shipping and delivered in 10 minutes is kind of the expectation, with the same day, next day delivery, and I think in Europe they're okay with waiting a few more days. Like in Norway, man, if I get the package within a week, I'm like, oh, someone's actually doing something. Because it can take, man, sometimes it can take weeks, and you're like, what are you doing?
Yeah,
we don't expect it the next day, but so there is those differences from a shipping times and what people expect. That's sort of it, I think, in the differences.
Now, one thing we talked about earlier before we went live was a giveaway, because we've got something planned for our listeners.
Yeah. So thanks for having me on the podcast and just chatting away about our nice gloves to help photographers stay out there in the winter. I'd like to hand over a pair of our let me think, Markov gloves, which are our sort of our main product, our best sellers, which suit your general most winter conditions. Give them away. If one of your lucky listeners wants to get their hands into some warm gloves and help them shoot throughout the winter, I'm happy to support your podcast and support some lucky listener.
Fantastic. So if you're listening to this on audio, or if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll make sure you check out the links in the description with all the instructions of what you have to do to be the lucky winner of a set of awesome photography gloves. Carl, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for being the guest on this week's Camera Shake podcast.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me. It's been great chatting with you. I've enjoyed the conversation, and all the best.
Okay, folks, that's it for today. What an absolute pleasure having Carl on the show. Hearing how he turned a simple idea born from frozen hands into a thriving brand for photographers everywhere was truly inspiring. And as always, before we go, let me just recommend another episode that I think you'll love. Check out episode 231, Why Most Creatives Fail, with Ty Turner. It's a fantastic deep dive into turning creativity into business success. And if you enjoy our content, consider supporting us on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake. It really does mean the world to us and helps us keep creating more exciting episodes. And again, I don't really know why I keep saying us. It's really just me. Anyhow, and don't forget, head over to www.camerashakepodcast.com and sign up to the mailing list. We've got some incredible stuff coming up very soon, so you'll know about it first. For those of you listening to the audio version, did you know that there's a fully fledged video version over on YouTube with plenty of visuals and examples of our guests' work? Well, just search for Camera Shake Podcast on YouTube and you can watch all past episodes over there. And if you're already on YouTube, drop us a comment, hit the like button, ring the bell, and share with your friends. Your engagement helps us reach a wider audience all over the world. And as always, keep shaking up the world of photography, and I'll see you next Thursday.